All right, welcome everyone. My name is Joshua Allen Young. I appreciate you being here for our second event of our fourth day of the XR Safety Week. We have a full day of some incredible medical related talks, and our next speaker, Shafi, is going to get started right now. So Shafi, please introduce yourself.
So, hi everyone, and of course, a wave to the audience both here on YouTube, wherever you're joining us. It's great to be here, actually. Thank you so much for the kind introduction and invitation from the hosting team, Kavya, Joshua, Ryan, all the others. I'm Professor Shafi Ahmed. I'm a surgeon based in London. I'm a cancer specialist. For the last 3 decades working on, treating patients with colorectal cancer. That's kind of my day job. And the kind of outside my kind of clinical work, I tend to do a lot of innovation, digital health, and also I've been involved in immersive tech for the past 7 or 8 years. So what I thought I'd do today is share just some of the journey and the stories around XR, includes of course augmented, virtual reality as well as mixed reality. Just show you where we are and where we've come from, and perhaps some of the kind of journeys that I've been on. So I'm just going to just do my emoji. There we are. Next slide. Good. Okay. Let's go back a long, long time ago. Actually, not so long ago. This is 2014, as you can see. Who remembers a Google Glass? Hands up. Yes, of course. It was way ahead of its time, of course. Essentially, it was a powerful camera. Some would call it an AR device very early on, because obviously it had a head-up display on your glasses. I remember when it came out, I decided to teach people using Google Glass, which kind of made headline news, but really heralded a kind of a new way of exposing people around the world to technology, a new way of learning. For me, it was about scaling the way I could teach people around the world. So I used Google Glass, I remember back in 2014, to do a live surgery. This is sorry about the graphic picture for those of you who might feel a bit nauseous. This is what's called a right hemicolectomy, removing part of the colon for cancer. And of course, cancer is a motive around the world, it's universal. So I thought if I could teach just a few medical students in my hospital, perhaps I could translate that to more students around the world. So I was the Associate Dean at Bart's Medical School, and I was trying to think about new ways of teaching people around the world, and particularly the art of surgery. So when we did this operation, we live streamed it. Again, that was, of course, very, I guess, forward thinking. It's connecting people. At that time, it was a 3G or 4G connection, and we'd stream live this operation around the world. 14,000 people watched the operation around the world, medical students, trainees, so that we were shown that just by using simple, essentially a smartphone on your head with a bit of AR capability, that we could reach people around the world very simply. So that was just one example of what we did back in 2014, as you can see, and the world, of course, has moved on so much since then. Gonna go for next slide. Okay, you got next slide. And of course, when we did this, we got a lot of interest from other people, and of course, glasses now have become much more sophisticated. Does anyone know who this is out of interest? This is John Sculley, the ex-CEO of Apple. You may, of course, you've all heard of him. And of course, he's the guy who sacked Steve Jobs, as you remember in the film, ex-CEO of Pepsi-Cola. So I taught John, who was 70 years of age at the time, back in Dubai, remotely using Google Glasses. And I was thinking, how do I scale this up to a much higher level? And John was quite a good game. And actually, he's got quite good surgical skills. I managed to train him to do simple suturing remotely using glasses. Of course, he was interested in mobile platforms, mobile phones. How do we access people around the world, particularly in India and other places where maybe access is not so easy? So it was really us trying to democratize education on a global level. So I'm just going to move, next slide, please. If we fast forward where we are now, that same kind of application that I was kind of thinking about in 2014 has now moved on 7 years later. The world has moved on. We're now into remote collaboration, remote training. We're on Microsoft Teams, Zoom, and now, of course, in VR spaces. All think about how do we get to the next level? Which platform is going to be useful for us in medicine or in other educational platforms to be able to converse, teach on a global scale? So this is actually just this year. So I work with Johnson & Johnson, as you can see. Vodafone, I happen to be their Connect Health ambassador. These are my kind of conflicts I'm telling you now so that you understand where I'm coming from. So I'm their ambassador for 5G and connected healthcare. And so the rods and cones is glasses that you can see, who create a platform around learning. So we streamed an operation using these technologies now, using AR, so you can actually connect, communicate, and do telementoring or teleproctoring using this device here. This is a gigacube, which essentially allows to amplify signals to 5G capability. And 5G, of course, allows us to showcase very low latency of 0.1 milliseconds and high kind of fast bandwidth, 1 to 2 gigabytes per second download. So it allows you to translate some of this really fast. The reason why it's pertinent because VR itself might be relevant later on with edge computing, with 5G, to be able to get those high speeds to allow us to use VR or XR in the way that it's supposed to be used. So I did this 7 years later, and this was much better. It was much easier. Great example of how now we've moved technology on, but talk about infrastructure. So we talk about XR. Don't think about XR on its own. The world is now about convergence. Some technologies impacting our lives at the same point of human existence. People call it the inflection point for humanity. Certainly the COVID pandemic is how we use technology at a different scale. In fact, it's AR, VR, or mixed reality, 5G, mobile 5G, edge computing, quantum computing, AI, deep machine learning, nanobiotechnology, wearable sensors. They're all going to be part and parcel of the healthcare of the future. It's how we create some of those solutions to solve some of our problems. So this is the kind of concept I've been talking about for a while. Slide, please. Thank you. So, if we think about the basic concept of AR, what's the easiest way to approach that in healthcare? Of course, it's the smartphone. We saw, of course, both Apple and the Android systems of AR Core and AR Kit being used to see whether we can create learning material within just a mobile phone. And you remember when we went back to VR only a few years ago, Samsung Gear VR, Gear VR, the Google Daydream, etc., were all based on a smartphone. And that was great in the sense that we could use a smartphone. Everyone has one, it's ubiquitous almost around the world, to be able to demonstrate some of these ideas. But of course, that's gone out of flavor. Now we've got standalone devices, whether it's Oculus Quest or HTC Vive Pro or Peak or others. We've seen now powerful standalone devices. So the phone, sadly, hasn't really given us what we wanted before. But all of us who are in the space had to work with all of these devices. Of course, we see these kind of tools right now on a smartphone or iPad or whatever. We can actually use some AR and learn, for in this case, is cardiac anatomy and cardiophysiology. So we're seeing now in real time use cases, a number of companies around the world working on mobile platforms for AR. So don't forget about those simple devices that we can now measure and work out how we use them in a different way. Next slide, please. So having done the world's first Google Glass operation in 2014 as a concept, pushing that boundary of what's possible with technology. And that was very much, of course, in its infancy. In 2016, I did the world's first virtual reality operation. I think Divya kindly mentioned in a keynote just a while ago. And Divya, of course, is a great friend and an amazing speaker. So it's great to be on the same stage as her virtually. So in April 2014, I remember we did the world's first VR surgery. It was 360. So we got some cameras in those days, we connected them, and we streamed live an operation. So the idea was that anybody with a Google Cardboard, you remember one of those, and a smartphone, could access a live operation from around the world, showcasing how we democratize education. And of course, that was pushing the boundary to its limits, and it got great kind of global attention. On that day, I think 55,000 people logged in remotely from 140 countries. 4,000 cities to experience this new world that we're living in. So we'd love to be a part of this. How does that work? Let's see whether I can transport myself from anywhere in the world. And we have people from Africa, South America, Asia, whatever you like, coming into my operating theatre at the Royal London Hospital and showcasing that what we can do is empower people more, take away some of the barriers, like you get in conflict zones or war zones, or because of geography or because of lack of resources, how to overcome some of the burden where people deserve very much a world-class education. So that was, we called it VR in OR. And of course, that was the first time we did this. This picture, of course, of me when I was, it's iconic, isn't it? It's become the face, if you like, of virtual reality over the last 7 years. And I must sell it as an NFT. That's my next aim, right? Because it's so probably quite valuable and I could do well with that. So that's my next aim. That's how NFTs work in selling my assets. So next slide, please. So then created a company called Medical Realities. We were one of the first VR companies in VR, trying to create learning in this environment. As you can see, we've spent time thinking about the experience of learning in VR with menu systems or whatever, going to different parts of an education. So we've done an end-to-end piece. We walk into our VR headset, then you can navigate through learning exercises, and then we recorded over 80 operations, surgical operations in 360, which then you can actually divide small segments to be able to learn in different ways. So you navigate through this portal, click, outcomes, and you can see live operations. Can we just go to the next slide, please? So this is kind of, as you get into the operation, which we've now divided into small subsections, there are hotspots, you can take the video link off, you can see what's going on in the operating theatre, and then you can actually navigate as though you're in the operating theatre itself. So obviously that's static, you haven't got the 6 degrees of freedom, but in the future what we're thinking about is actually doing the whole piece around the operating theatre. So you can walk around it, see what's going on, allowing the full capability of VR to be experienced by anybody around the world. So we've been working on these kind of platforms for a long time. And I know that I think Richard Price and Ralph, or in the audience maybe from Health Education England, who've been doing amazing work on promoting all this work across the UK. The UK has been great at trying to understand this better and amplifying those messages. Next slide, please. The next part, once you've learned something on a medical exercise, and then seeing it being, seeing an operation, for example, the next part, simulations. It's that end-to-end piece of learning. Hopefully that will shorten the time to train or improve the training requirements and allow more people to see what's going on. During the pandemic, our students, our trainees and doctors haven't been allowed to see as much as before because of the risks of pandemic. Our medical students at Bart's Medical School were not allowed to go into the wards, indeed see patients who were literally on the front line. So if we'd predicted that 3 or 4 years ago, said, let's think about hybrid models of learning. What else can we create? Maybe XR is a form that we could use. For me, AR, VR, and MR are just natural extensions of learning. We've come a long way from papyrus to books, and then onto online platforms, digital platforms. And AR and VR are just extensions of the platforms we can use to offer a hybrid model of education. It's augmenting learning experiences. And so simulation, as you've seen from Divya's example in orthopedics and others, is going to be huge. Look at the World Health Organization. They've suggested by 2030 will be 14 million health workers short across the world. That's nurses, that's doctors, etc. So how do we overcome that burden? Can we train people differently? Can we accelerate training using XR? Maybe we should think about these ideas to be able to fast forward or fast track people through their learning or offer them improved learning. Next slide. So a lot of my work is about global health work. So I've spent, before the pandemic, I went to about 35 countries in about 5 years, working with governments, working with ministers of health, universities, colleges to understand healthcare better, digital health access, trying to make healthcare more equitable and ultimately more affordable. So we took headsets, for example, around the world, Bangladesh, to parts of Africa, and this is Sierra Leone, where they don't have great training. It's pretty limited. So we took the headsets to train the surgeons to perform different operations. So we could teach them using a smartphone. Do you remember the old Samsung Gear VR? A smartphone and our own medical realities app. So we could offer them training. We thought that was, we really got a lot of good feedback on that. They really felt empowered. They could actually either stream live, watch an operation, get trained around the world. This is work we did with Leeds University with a colleague of mine called William Bolton, the research team at Leeds University. So showcasing that even these simple devices could be helpful in democratizing healthcare around the world. Next slide. I mentioned earlier during the pandemic, we had to rethink the model of learning. So what we did, is I didn't show any videos just in case they weren't working today, so I've just got some just pictures and images. So this is the lecture theatre at Arts Medical School. And what we've got here, essentially, during the pandemic, we weren't allowed to bring them to the wards. So we brought the ward to them. So in here, you've got essentially 400 seats. We had 70 social distance during the pandemic. A moderator at the front who could then relay information through my eyes. I was on the ward, the HoloLens doing ward rounds, seeing patients, transmitted to the lecture theatre, moderation. So then you create a model, a new way of learning remotely. And our patients and our students could take histories, examine remotely with me, interact with our patient. They felt they weren't missing out too much. Of course, it doesn't replace face-to-face, but actually it adds value, it augments, it supports education. And that's the key. People think we're going to replace traditional face-to-face. Of course we're not. It's augmenting what we know already. Where does the value of XR come in? Next slide. We're also seeing XR used in surgery. Now, Divya mentioned about surgical navigation, looking at techniques of operating and training simulation. This is a friend of mine from Japan, Maki Sugimoto and his team. I'm not sure if Maki is here today. Hollow Eyes. We can actually now take in DICOM images, CTs, MRIs in real time, put it onto the patient. This is a patient undergoing liver surgery. You can see the liver anatomy. So theoretically, in the future, if it was good enough, you could be able to navigate through an operation using XR, allowing you to avoid important structures that should not be damaged, or indeed taking out a tumor or a cancer with good margins. It could help you. We've never had help during the surgical operation apart from intuition and judgment and experience. Maybe XR, AI, and those technologies can allow us to be much more precise in the future and also be able to train remotely. Some of these ideas now are being used to do remote telementoring. Next slide. This is me, it's my avatar. Back in 2017, I've always thought about being virtual, being remote, and being able to connect with people around the world. And this is my avatar on a platform created by Atheo, and it's called the Beam platform. And what we did then, we decided to connect me as my avatar with two other avatars around the world. So I was in London, there was a surgeon in the Tata Memorial Hospital in Mumbai in India, also one in America. We converged in that virtual world to be able to converse with images, scans, whatever, doing a live operation at the Royal London. And again, this made headline news. And I always thought this was really the first bits of the surgical metaverse. You know, of course, Meta is very cool now as a name, and of course, Facebook has changed its name to Meta. But 3 years ago, I was thinking, how do we collaborate remotely? Of course, now we've got Teams, we've got Zoom, we're now connected remotely through these platforms. But I was thinking, how do I convert myself as into that metaverse? So this was great. This is what we did. You can see that video from BBC Click, which shows exactly how we did this and how we managed to create an MDT setting live in the OR. Next slide. And then we went one further. Of course, that's avatars. We want to be much more realistic, and we want photo images of people to be more credible. This is that new platform. That was me, of course, during the pandemic, training people around the world about the pandemic using 3D animation, 3D assets, etc. Of course, we're seeing that now in these kind of platforms like AltSpace VR, Spatial.io. Arthur is a great little platform that we've been using recently around how we create that. And in January, I'll be doing the UK's first full lecture in VR at our medical school, so that we can actually now be able to train the future generations of doctors in this space. So I'll share that with you, of course, in January as we're planning at the moment. Next slide. And of course, last thing is about holograms. How do you now use avatars, holograms? I've done a lot of holographic presentations around the world, literally appearing as a hologram disappearing. Again, showing the benefit where mixed reality is coming in. If you look at the original HoloLens demonstration by Microsoft around holographic interpretation, we was close to actually delivering that idea, where as a hologram you can appear. This was me as my hologram, created from mixed reality devices using 5G technology so that we can transmit it remotely very quickly. And of course, the future is going to be that more of that remote collaboration as we enter that world that we call the metaverse. Next slide. The last one. That's good. So I thought I'd just take you on a brief journey of my experiences over the last 7 years of where we were 7 years ago. You remember when the Oculus was first released, that device tethered to a computer that gave you terrible nausea and sickness. We've got now with a mobile device using 6 degrees of freedom, extra device allowing you to interact remotely, collaborate, connect, and now we're here together in this virtual space. What a journey that's been. So healthcare itself is well designed to be disrupted in 2021 and beyond. And what we're seeing now is we are thinking really outside the box. How do we bring some of these ideas to the market to enable people to have better understanding? I think, this whole concept of training, education, simulation is well suited to the world of XR. Thank you very much. I hope that was useful to you to share my personal story and journey, as well as showing you where the future might lie. And I think we've got about 7 minutes, I think, for some questions, if that's helpful. I'm happy to take questions.
Yes, absolutely. We definitely have some time. Thank you for sharing all that experience. It's fascinating to hear the history of this, so to speak, going all the way back to Google Glass. Honestly, this is some of the most exciting parts of XR for me is the potentials in this space. So it's just really incredible to see the ways that this can revolutionize healthcare in a big way. So, well, okay, great. So we do have a few minutes for questions. We're going to kind of use the emoji system. So if you can raise your hand, I'll call on you and then I'll amplify you so everybody can hear you. So does anybody have a question? Remember, just use the emoji if you have one. Okay. Well, I guess we don't have any questions.
No problems. Okay. Oh, there's a question over there, I think.
Oh, right here. Okay, Ellie. Okay, Ellie, give me 1 second. I'll amplify you. Okay, Ellie, go ahead and unmute.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to ask about, I guess many people do have difficulty at this time with VR in terms of nausea and discomfort. So how are we going to deal with that as a barrier to making this more universally accessible?
Yeah, it's a great question. Obviously, things have got better over the last 7 years. With all the technology around eye tracking, etc., seamless movements, high bit rate, etc., it has improved immeasurably. The other thing, of course, is how much time can you spend in VR? That's the other thing, of course. How much time do you recommend? And you remember when we first came out about 4 or 5 years ago, there was consensus saying you shouldn't spend more than 20, 30 minutes at a time. That was the idea to stop you having problems or the sensation of nausea and other kind of problems you're having. So I think we've got to set that in stone of what's actually reasonable. How much time do we recommend? How much time do you need to rest? So that everyone has a certain, maybe the XRSI, this whole society needs to think about actually what do we recommend as the minimum requirements to get good learning without getting those symptoms. And the other thing I think is about, technology is now improving so rapidly, we're now seeing much better real imagery. So part of it is the kind of how do you create real life like experiences you get in there. That'll improve to a certain extent. Devices became much cheaper, of course, and that helps. In terms of comfort, I think they are getting more comfortable. It's still sometimes a little bit uncomfortable as you adjust things. But again, I think we need to work on the ergonomics more. I agree with you. I think we're at a stage where you can keep it on for a long while without getting fatigue or feeling some pressure around your forehead or your head or whatever. So I think now that we've got good hardware, maybe we need to spend time on the ergonomics, the comfort going forward. And we're spending a lot of time and effort on that. So if we are going into this metaverse and decide that we can use it longer term, let's make it really comfortable, effortless, lighter, so that it's easier. People talk about, so if you make it lighter, for example, that's an advantage. And then the work I do with telco, telephone communications, we're moving on to edge computing. So if you take out the stuff to edge computing, take away a lot of the power and the weight of a device, it suddenly becomes lighter. Maybe we need to move away from having everything on the headset, moving it to the cloud or locally to be able to do that computing. If we can actually have less weight on your head. So these are kind of things I think we should think about. And I absolutely agree. If it's here for the long term, it has to be fit for purpose and comfortable.
That was a phenomenal answer. Okay, I see BR in the background that you had a question. Give me 1 second and I'll amplify your voice. Okay, please go ahead and ask your question.
uh, good afternoon. A great presentation. I wanted to ask about, for the neurodiverse community, how can this, VR help them? And, especially who have learning difficulties, have you seen any use cases which can really, help this community in terms of either therapy or education?
Great
That's a
question.
really good question. Yeah, a really good question. What we don't want to do is create a divide. And with threat of technology, always there's that kind of risk of creating divide, whether it's having access to a smartphone, access to connectivity. We're seeing that more common during the pandemic. We are seeing actually rehabilitation. So, for example, I think Divya mentioned people with strokes, for example, as an example, who are debilitated by lack of movement. To rehabilitate those, people are now using VR therapy tools. So you can think about those people also having limitations in terms of physical ability. So take that, extrapolate that to people who don't have that, who have disability, may be an answer or a solution. We've also seen even elderly people who may not really want to engage with technology as much as we assume, who have now who go into these headsets and actually are transformed. I remember a few years ago, there was this great VR tool called Walking Through Dementia, aimed at patients with dementia and also people who don't have dementia to understand dementia better, be able to understand, go through this whole environment. I hope that would help and support them through their disability. So I think it has the potential to improve people's lives, even with disability, be able to democratize some of the things we're talking about. Again, that's work that needs to be carried out and extrapolated, and some research and trials need to be done to validate that. I think it could be the enabler, it could be the equalizer of a lot of things that we don't have access to from before. And you remember, disability, there's a device that allows people around the world who have blindness. I remember this great device, I think through Peak Vision, I can't remember the name, to allow you to use an AR device to see much better. Never solved the problem of blindness around the world. Using some AR devices, suddenly are using that to be able to give people vision back. So actually, let's think outside the box. Some of these people who didn't have the ability to do certain things could have it if we think much wider and just to step outside the envelope, think how this technology could be applied to them.